Good. Right, good evening everybody and welcome to Cheltenham Borough Council's Licensing Committee, which is being held today, Wednesday the 5th of March 2025. My name is Councillor Dr David Willingham and I'm Chair of the Committee. The meeting is being live streamed to Cheltenham Borough Council's YouTube channel and a recording of the meeting will be held for 4 years. If there are any breaks in the transmission to the YouTube stream, the meeting will be adjourned for a short period until any technical issues are resolved. To the public present, if you are here to make a representation to the meeting, you are consenting to the use of the sound and video recordings for broadcast and training purposes. Please also be aware that CCTV and audio recording is now in operation in the public gallery, and the recordings will be held by the council for 5 months. We're not expecting a fire alarm test, so if the fire alarm does sound, you should immediately make your way out through the nearest exit, which is the door that you came in through. And the muster point is the War Memorial outside the municipal offices. If you have a mobile phone or any other electronic devices that make pinging sounds or ring or what have you, could you please put them on silent for the duration of the meeting? Right, with that, I shall start with the agenda. So agenda item number 1 is apologies for absence. There are 10 of us here, so there are none. Agenda item 2 is declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest?
I would just like to say that item 11, I did visit Cambray Place earlier on my way here.
Thank you. I'll say that I also did an informal visit to Cambray Place for the same item. Is there anyone else that needs to just say they visited? Councillor Harvey.
I walked through Cambray with a coffee today. I didn't see it was on the agenda for tonight.
No, perfect. Right. I think it's just so that people know that we've gone and seen the site. Right. Agenda item 3, public questions. There are none. Agenda item 4 is the... I haven't got a pen now, have I? Somewhere. Agenda item 4 are the minutes of the previous meeting. And if I take that with... So are there any issues or corrections, any points of clarification for those minutes? Are we happy that I sign them as a true record? Show of hands. Perfect. Right, I will do that one. Just need to find where to sign. Make sure I do the right one. Put those out of the way so I don't scribble on them later in the meeting. So agenda item 5 is minutes of the subcommittee meeting from, I think we've got 2 of those, haven't we? So we've got the 8th of January and the 5th of February. So are there any clarifications or corrections for those? Are we happy that I sign them both as a true and accurate record? I'm seeing nods. Perfect. Right. While I sign those, if we move on to agenda item 6, which is deviation from Hackney Carriage Vehicle Policy. So I'll invite the Licensing and Public Protection Manager to introduce the report, and then we will take questions from councillors, and then we will hear from our taxi drivers who are here today. So I will ask our Democratic Services officer to just go through so that you each get your opportunity to speak. Hopefully, if you can keep your comments succinct, that would be helpful. So not more than a couple of minutes, if that's possible. We want to make sure you get your voice heard. Members may have questions for you, but we need to get through the business of the meeting as well. So with that, if I hand over to our Licensing and Public Protection Manager.
Thank you, Chair. So this report is a deviation from the current Hackney Carriage Vehicle Policy. In 2021, the Council introduced a policy for all Hackney carriages to be wheelchair accessible vehicles by the 31st of December 2021, as there was an aspiration for the whole fleet to be wheelchair accessible vehicles. I'll refer to that as a WAV for short. On the 21st of September 2021, the Council determined to halt the implementation of this policy and to deliver a mixed fleet of WAVs and non-WAVs in line with the Department for Transport best practice guidance. The Council decided that saloon-type vehicles could continue to be licensed pending the approval of a new and yet to be decided policy. Any new vehicle applications would still have to be a wheelchair accessible vehicle. In the summer of 2024, a draft policy was submitted for consultation, which proposed that any Hackney carriage vehicle holder had changed from a saloon to the wheelchair accessible vehicle under the mandatory 2021 policy requirement would be able to revert to a saloon vehicle. This was on the provision that the WAV remained on the fleet. However, Hackney carriage vehicle licences can expire, so these WAVs, even though remaining on the fleet, may not remain. In the summer of that policy consultation went no further due to changes in the licensing team. However, we have now picked up that policy consultation and that is currently out to consultation. And it remains that all new Hackney carriage vehicles must be a WAV and that all existing Hackney carriages must be replaced with a WAV if they are a WAV. The proposed policy has not yet been implemented and that will hopefully take effect from July this year. The subcommittee is asked to consider this matter and determine whether to permit the below Hackney carriage vehicle licence holders to be transferred to a saloon-type vehicle in line with policy requirements for replacement saloon vehicles, and if the Hackney carriage vehicle licence holder chooses to permit the WAV to remain on the fleet if it exceeds age requirements for new Hackney carriage vehicles in line with upper age restriction policy requirements. Or you can refuse to request the request to permit the Hackney carriage vehicle licences to revert back to saloon vehicles. So we have 9 vehicle licence holders that have been affected by this policy requirement, and they're all here tonight to speak. If you want any questions answered, I can do that for you, Chair. Thank you.
We've got 11 people, I think. We haven't got 11? 10. 10. So we've got an extra person somewhere. But
Chair, can I suggest that we ask the vehicle licence holders to present themselves and then we can go through the list of who we have here?
I think first, are there any questions from members to the officer? Councillor Pinniger.
My understanding is that a normal vehicle, a normal Euro 6 saloon, Euro 6 or better, so petrol or hybrid as well, can operate up to 5 years old, and a WAV can operate up to 8 years old. Is that correct?
Thank you, Chair. So currently, there's no upper age limit for a Euro 6 vehicle. For a wheelchair accessible vehicle, they can operate up to 14 years of age. It's at first licensing that there is a 5-year age limit for saloon type vehicles and an 8-year upper age limit for wheelchair accessible vehicles.
Applied for both at the moment.
Any further questions? So I just want to question I know the answer to, but can you confirm that we've varied this policy for other drivers in the past as well?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, there were other vehicle licence holders that were affected by this 2021 policy. They've all been determined on their own individual merits, whether that's through a medical exemption process, because it is heavy when you push wheelchairs around, or they've had their own individual reports brought to a committee meeting.
Councillor Boys and then Councillor Dr Steinhardt.
Thank you, Chair. So just for clarity, could you just explain around point 1.4, which says that the policy requirement will be able to revert to a saloon vehicle. This was on the provision that the WAV remained in the fleet. Can you explain how those WAVs would remain in the fleet? Was my one question. And the other question was, are there any other drivers that are going to come forward, to your knowledge, that have fallen into this sort of loophole?
Thank you, Chair. The first point, so the draft policy that went out to consultation last year covered the 2021 policy within that consultation. So that was proposing that anybody that complied with that policy requirement of having a WAV would be able to licence a saloon as long as that WAV remained on the fleet. The only problem with that is if you were to do that, then if you didn't renew that wheelchair accessible vehicle licence, it could just expire. So with the current consultation, which started on Monday, the reference to the 2021 licence holders has been removed because that's the purpose of tonight's meeting. And also so we can solve this as quickly as possible and not wait until the summer. So that's why I've got the separate report today.
Councillor Dr Steinhardt.
Just a quick numbers one. Is how many have been exempted under other rules like medical exemption up to now under the old policy?
I haven't got the exact figure, but it's a handful.
I think if it helps, there were a reasonably small cohort of people, many of whom are here tonight, who were caught in a bit of a trap where the council changed its policy. They abided by the changed policy. The Hackney Carriage Trade objected to the policy quite vehemently, and then the council changed the policy back. So they were caught in a bit of a difficult situation. And I think we are hopefully trying to rectify that. So if I now go through and we can hear from the drivers individually. Do you want to go through, just get the names? I don't know whether you can enable the microphones for the relevant people, and we'll see if that works. If not, you need to just press the button until you've got a red light and then speak. And if you, as I say, if you can keep your remarks relatively short, that'd be appreciated. Thank you.
First, if we could have Anthony Dolby.
I've got a medical exemption certificate, so I don't have to take wheelchairs. So there's not really much point in me having a WAV. And I have got a driver who's interested in buying it, and it would make more sense for him to have it. And if we do get permission, I want to change to an electric saloon car. But I'm worried about this 5-year age limit policy on saloon cars, because electric vehicles cost quite a lot to buy. You'd need to buy a 3-year-old one to make it economical. And then, you know, you could only keep it 2 years. Have I got that wrong?
I think we might need to clarify that. I think the age limit, I'll ask the officers, but my understanding is the age has to be under 5 years on first registration. But I'll get my officer team to confirm.
How long can you keep it then?
Can you press the button?
Thank you, Chair. So with carbon neutral vehicles, so an electric vehicle, there would be no upper age limit on that as long as they were compliant with garage testing and MOT requirements.
Perfect. Next.
Next, could we have John Donaher?
Sorry about my voice, but it's the way it is. I'm not Mr. Dolby there, apart from I haven't got an exemption certificate, but I can quite easily get one if I need one. The emissions on the vehicle is something I'm a bit concerned about. I can't see why we have to buy a 5-year-old vehicle if the emissions on the vehicle is already to a standard. I can't see why it can't be older. And also, I can't see why we can't sell our vehicles, the WAVs, to the trade, so you at least have another WAV in the fleet, and the individuals buy an ordinary saloon car as well. So you have an extra WAV on the fleet. And hopefully that driver will keep that WAV on the fleet.
Thank you, Chair. So this report tonight is to permit you to change back to a saloon. The second part of the report is so if you've got a wheelchair accessible vehicle that's currently over 5 years of age, which is what we would first license in at the moment, is to permit you to sell that to another member of the trade or a new licence holder, as long as it's no more than the 14 years upper age limit.
Yep, so next speaker, please.
Next, could we have Parin Dramaki?
Right, the car I have I have so much issues with mechanical problems, and it's uncomfortable to drive. So that's one of the reasons I would like to change, go back again to saloon car, hybrid.
Next speaker, please.
Next, could we have Deepak Duakadas?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Well, I have a wheelchair accessible, but if you permit us to go for saloon, then my wheelchair one is now like more than 5 years old. So am I able to sell the vehicle or no? As a taxi.
Thank you, Chair. No, so a saloon vehicle would have to be 5 years or under for you to licence it.
Okay, next speaker.
Could we next have Jaydeep Kalapi?
Yeah, I've been driving taxi with Cleveland Taxis. We're already doing few journeys with disabled access and stuff. I think I'm happy driving the disabled access, but I would rather have a normal car as well as this. And for this one, I had to change because of the plans what we had. But yeah, I can move it back to the other car and do airports and things with a normal car, and I can still have a disabled access car to do my normal everyday journeys, which I normally do anyway. But yeah, that's about it. As long as I get to keep both of the cars or something, then that would be perfect.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Thank you. Could we have Ilesh Kumar Mugatla?
Since we've been caught on this trap of changing our saloons to WAV, and was a really bad time, was during pandemic, and we didn't have any choice of which car to buy. So we had to make a quick decision because we didn't have much time. And until December, if we didn't have bought the WAV, I will lose my license. And well, I'll appreciate if you can revert the situation and we go back to normal. And if you can buy just a normal saloon car, hybrid or electric, whatever. And yeah, I'll be back to normal again. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Thank you. Could we have Abdul Muhif?
My colleague has said previously this in the pandemic situation, and when council stopped MOT before 31st January, so the situation forced us to buy a wheelchair accessible, and even we cannot at that time. Market was very high, and first of all, if we consider the financial point of view, when we convert from saloon to wheelchair, my plate value goes down, because it has a business value of the plate for the saloon car, but for the wheelchair accessible, as we are giving the license for the anybody can, so we don't have any value for the plate. So in this case, I bought this business around £8,000 at that time, but totally it is at that time we don't have any value for this one, and maintenance cost is so high with this wheelchair vehicle, and because of this, why it is very. Last year I spent around more than £6,000 for my car, total year maintenance cost. Yeah. And another problem is the elderly people, it is high. Elderly people could not get access. They feel trouble to get in this high vehicle. They always prefer the saloon one. And if you choose the demand, I got it from May 2021. I got only 4 wheelchair job from the station. Two times and 2 new customers. So altogether 3 people I use the wheelchair. Normally they call the what is called the private hire, and they don't bother for the come to the rank and go to the wheelchair access. Yeah, and so maintenance. This it is not a purpose-built taxi. It is converted as a wheelchair, and this taxi was used to drive some mobility people, those who used to this, and they did not maintain this car properly, and this fleet company bought a whole load, and this is why it's actually maintenance cost is because so high. So if you revert the situation, and already some people are they did not comply the policy at that time, they're trying to end of the deal. But those who are comply with your policy, we have become the this situation. So I requested you to, if you revert the situation, it will great benefit for us.
Microphone. Thank you. Press the button. That's it. Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Could we have Ashley Parsons?
Good evening. Before I had to change my car, I had quite a lot of 6-seater business with my old vehicle. And since I've had to change to a wheelchair accessible vehicle, I've lost all my 6-seater work. All my customers have gone. I'm not able to carry 6, only 4. I've got very, very little wheelchair work and done very few jobs in the time that I've had it. It's a shame we're all caught up in this loop, but yeah, I would like it reversed so that we could change to a normal car. They're not particularly comfortable cars to spend the whole day sat in. I do get a lot of backache now, which I never used to get with my old car. So I personally would like it changed so I could get back to a 6-seater, preferably. That's my concerns.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Could we have Malcolm Rogers?
Yeah. Well, one of the main reasons I changed my car was because obviously I was going to lose my license if I didn't. At that time, I lost all my airport work, and I used to do quite a bit of work for my own customers, which I've now lost because they didn't want to use that vehicle. I also think now that going back to being allowed to change back to another car, I just feel that we should be able to sell that WAV to anyone we like, not in the trade. Because when we bought it and we sold our other cars, I literally lost thousands of pounds, which I've already told the council about. I mean, I literally lost thousands of pounds because I had to buy this WAV, and I had to basically get rid of my other vehicle, which was a perfectly good vehicle. And so on that basis, I also think that the council should be looking at compensating all these drivers, the ones that actually lost a lot of money and a lot of work, when we already said at that very first meeting that, this wasn't fair. The council at that time disagreed with us, but obviously have changed their minds on this situation. And I do feel that I'm not saying it's going to be a fantastic amount, but what I'm saying is I do think that we should be allowed to sell our WAVs to anybody we like, because if I do buy another vehicle less than 5 years old now, I would like to just put my WAV as a deposit for it, because I haven't got that sort of cash to go and pay, And I have had my car advertised for quite a while on the taxi forum, and I've had nobody that wants it. So I can't change back until that happens. I've been granted, to change the vehicle because I've got a back problem. And so, that's okay. But I think the main issue now is who we sell it to, just not being tied up again and saying you've got to sell it to them, to the trade, because if the trade doesn't want it, which it seems like they don't, we're stuck,
Thank you very much. And I think there will be the final speaker, will it? Yep.
Finally, could we have Ajit Vasant Kumar?
Hi, we had just changed the vehicle because we were implementing that the policy on 2021 in pandemic time. Yeah, so we had to make a quick decision. Yeah, to buy the WAV. Yeah, otherwise we would carry out with the saloon car. But in September we heard about that. They just changed now policy, and you are going to have a mixed fleet and all that. So at least those people who are affected with this policy, yeah. So you should give permission to revert car, saloon car. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Right. What we'll now do is hear from members. So I've got Councillor Wheeler and then Councillor Pinniger and then Councillor Boyes.
I think this is more a question to officers, but based on something, I think it was the first speaker said, about possibly changing to an all-electric vehicle. Now, insofar that they can change like for like, we did have a gentleman, back last year sometime, who requested to change his car from an all-electric vehicle back to a hybrid because he couldn't put in a full shift. Today, if we go down this road and someone decides to have an all-electric vehicle, are we going to be put in the position where they might be asking to change once again?
Thank you, Chair. The proposed policy will be like for like in terms of the body of the vehicle. So a saloon could be replaced with a saloon regardless of the emissions. The 2030 proposed date in the policy to be carbon neutral will still stand. So if they were to go from an electric vehicle back to a Euro 6 vehicle, they would need to be mindful of that 2030 proposed cut-off date at the current time being for carbon neutral vehicles.
Councillor Pinniger.
So partly, this is discussion now, is it? Yeah. Partly in response to Simon, the car in question was an Astra that was a few years old and probably had a range, I think, of 160 miles. But if you get a modern electric car now, you'll have a range of over 300. And I think that's what you would pick if you were a taxi driver. It's just he didn't have the money for a 300-mile car at that point. 2 years later, the price has come right down. And so financially, I believe it does make sense because they spend less time in the garage, they need less maintenance. And both councils, GCC and CBC, are working on charging points. But that's not my main point. There are going to be more charges around town. I understand that the costs and disadvantages of being onerous and having the injustice on top of that mean that it must really smart to have been put in this situation. So I just wanted to thank you for your support to our disabled residents during this time, because I'm sure that's valued. I agree that keeping the WAV in the trade compounds that injustice, and I want to ask, is there any scope to change this in today's proceedings? Because I think that sounds like it's a separate issue. And I just wanted to note that I understand that we continue with 30% WAVs. I'm clear that not all, in a survey that Martin Horwood commissioned, I'm clear that not all disabled customers want a WAV to turn up. And I just wanted to reiterate that our policy is under review and I think will go live in July, and that will determine the future of WAVs and electrics and all those good things. So there's just one question in there. Is there any scope to change the policy of them keeping this WAV in the trade? I think you said yourself that actually, once this has gone through and they've bought a saloon, there's nothing to stop people letting that plate expire anyway.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, just to confirm that, we could determine that the WAV needs to remain in the fleet. So either that's sold to another licence holder, or we allow the vehicle licence holders to apply for another licence for their saloons. But plates can expire. They're only issued for 12 months.
Councillor Boyes?
Thank you, Chair. Situations like this have come in front of us before, and I understand from the officers that there shouldn't be any more circumstances where this will come in front of us again. Obviously, in 2021, the council introduced a policy for all Hackney carriages to be WAVs, and then in September 2021, the council determined to halt that implementation. Then there was a further, in 2023, there was a new policy introduced, and in summer 24, a draft policy was submitted. And then now we're at the stage where we're going out to consultation on a new policy, which will come into effect from July 2025. We have shown leniency before because there was a lot of ambiguity around where the policy stood and where the driver stood, and I think that's not been particularly fair for the drivers at the moment. Who are stuck in that situation. We've shown leniency before, and if this is the end of it now, I think that it's only fair we show that leniency again. So that's what I think about it all right now.
Thank you. So from my point of view, we have to consider as a council our public sector equality duty and say, have we given due regard to the needs of disabled people? And we have a mixed fleet. Anyone that turns up as a new driver and says, I want to drive in Cheltenham, has to have a wheelchair accessible vehicle. But I think in formulating this policy and forcing a cut-off date where perfectly good vehicles needed to be sold and disposed of, and everybody had to move to a WAV, was an error by the council, and I hope we won't repeat this. What I think we need to do is to make sure that the vehicle that you have continues to be licensed under the conditions that you license that vehicle until it reaches its natural end of life. So if you buy a vehicle, you would be under the conditions and the lifetime of that vehicle, because otherwise we end up really messing around with the taxi trade. And I think this policy has probably been one of the things that really hasn't worked in us as a council being seen to support the taxi trade. So my personal view is I would be more than happy to allow the drivers who we've inconvenienced, who previously had saloon vehicles, who went to WAV before the policy was reverted, to go back to saloon vehicles. And I think what they do with that WAV, we should allow it if it's under even if it was bought under the age limit and they want to sell it to someone else as a taxi, even if it's now over 5 years old, I think we should try and allow that to be kept into the fleet so that there are more WAVs. But I also think that if drivers wish to sell it not into the fleet, but somewhere else, that they should be able to do that if they can get more in terms of part exchange. I think that is the most equitable outcome that we can give to these drivers. And I don't know what other members will say, but from my point of view and as the chair, I actually want to apologise to you for the inconvenience and the difficulty this has caused, because I think I recognise this didn't work very well. And I think we need to have this policy where your vehicle carries on until it reaches the end of its natural life, or the 14-year cut-off, because there is no point forcing people to change vehicles midway through their lifespan. And I think, we need to do what we can as a council, potentially in the few years left before local government reorganisation, to try and rebuild the trust and the confidence that the Hackney carriage trade has somewhat lost in the council because of this rather unfortunate misstep. So I think what I'm saying on this one is that we should go down the decision making, and my view is we permit the Hackney carriage vehicle licences to be transferred to a saloon type vehicle in line with policy requirements for replacement saloon vehicles, and if the Hackney carriage licence holder chooses to permit the WAV to remain, and I'll put me hang on, I need some water. And then B, which is if the Hackney carriage vehicle licence holder chooses to permit the WAV to remain on the fleet if it exceeds the age requirements for a new Hackney carriage vehicle, as long as it's in line with the upper age restriction policy. So that hopefully gives you as drivers the maximum flexibility that we can offer you. We can't make any decisions about compensation or anything else, but I imagine that will have been heard by people who do have the power to make those decisions. Let me take Councillor Wheeler.
Yes, it's not really anything for a decision to be made at this committee, but just food for thought. Those drivers that do have vehicles that they want to sell into the trade, could we actually look at some way where officers that are seeing potential new taxi drivers get signposted to some of those people that have got vehicles that want to? I know it's a difficult one and it's not a decision for us, but it's just something that we might want to think about.
I think the officers might be. I don't think the council wants to go into the used taxi market. How can putting it politely? I think we need to stay out of that and leave that to the drivers and the trade. I think there's a nod from. Does anyone else want to comment, or shall we take that as a vote on block? So A and B. We're happy to vote. So all those. Sorry. Are you happy to vote, or do you want to comment, Richard? Okay.
I just want to be crystal clear that options A and B mean that they can sell the vehicle privately.
Okay, so if we move to the vote, please. Perfect. Okay, so all 10 people have voted. That's 9 in favour and 1 abstention. And I know my colleague who has abstained has concerns about disability, which is why he's taken that view. So you've heard what we've had to say. You will be allowed to go back to your saloon vehicles. And as I said, from the chair sitting here, I apologise to you for the inconvenience that this misstep in our policy making has caused you. The licensing team will be in touch with you in due course, just to confirm this and work out the next steps. And thank you very much for taking the time to come here this evening and give us your views. You are more than welcome to stay if you wish to watch, but if you need to get back, because I'm guessing this is probably your busier time, then we can take a. Shall we just take 5 minutes?
That'd be good. Thank you.
Good to go back. Right. Are we live again? No. Right. If we now move on to agenda item 7, which is a review of the Hackney Carriage bylaws. So if I can invite our licensing and public protection manager to introduce the report, please.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a report for the review of the Hackney Carriage bylaws. Our current bylaws were adopted in 2012. The Department for Transport has developed a new set of model bylaws and are attached to Appendix B of your report. You'll notice that there isn't much difference between the two. However, it is best practice to keep our
Are we having problems with the audio? Can you, right. Bear with us a second. Can you hear? Okay. So, for anyone watching on the webcast, we're just we've got some issues with hearing loops, which we're just going to try and sort out. So bear with us. Has turning it off and turning it back on again worked? That's the IT question.
I can't hear.
How's that? Can you hear me now? No? Can you hear me?
This one's working.
I'm just going to take mine off anyway. You just have to shout at me.
Well, we will try and continue to sort this out. So if I hand back to you, and back to our officer.
That's okay. Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I'll start again. So this is a report for the review of our Hackney Carriage bylaws. Our current bylaws were adopted in 2012, and the Department for Transport has currently developed a new set of model bylaws, and they're attached to Appendix B of your report. You'll notice that there isn't much difference between the two. However, it is best practice to keep our bylaws up to date. So the committee is recommended to resolve that the attached model bylaws be approved for the purpose of consultation, which means we'll go out for a 12-week consultation with the Hackney Trade, and then comments will come back to the licensing committee later in the year, and then we will recommend to full council to adopt the new set of model bylaws. There is then a process where we will go to the Secretary of State to repeal the current bylaws and adopt the new set of model bylaws. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's quite interesting to draw out the text at the top of page 31, which says that the bylaws are made under the Town Police Clauses Act 1847 and the Public Health Act 1875. So Victorian legislation still affecting how councils regulate Hackney carriages. Unless anyone has anything particularly else that they wish to add, I was going to suggest we move to the vote, but Councillor Pinniger.
Sorry, it's a question. In common with sort of planning documentation, so we've got these Hackney Carriage bylaws, and then they are the foundation for how it all has to happen. And then our licensing policy guidance and conditions sit on top of that. Just want to confirm the relationship of the two documents.
Thank you, Chair. So with Hackney Carriage driver licences, we cannot attach conditions by law. So the model bylaws are those conditions as such that the drivers would have to comply with. The policy, as you say, is additional to that. So that outlines our application requirements for vehicles and drivers, the application requirements that they have to go through, like DBS checks, safeguarding training, and also it sets out any other conditions for other types of licences, like vehicles and operators.
Councillor Sankey.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question, does the bylaws and the policy, is that provided in other languages? Because a lot of our taxi drivers, English isn't their first language.
Thank you, Chair. It isn't available in another language. I'm sure we could look into translation services though.
I would think Google Translate's probably going to work. I mean, at least it's not trying to translate the 1847 legislation. That might struggle a bit more. Councillor Wheeler.
Not wishing to disadvantage anybody, but am I right in believing that one of the conditions of their licence is that they should have a sound understanding of English? So that will cover that one then.
I think there is a an English language test, but I think from my experience of chairing committees and in interacting with our Hackney trade, there is a very big difference between someone who can manage to take a booking, take a fare, and know place names in Cheltenham versus dealing with quite technical legislative language. So one of them might be that they need the equivalent of B1 or B2. I don't know where our language level sits, but in order to understand the really detailed legislation, you may well need to be up to C2, which may be more advanced than our language test requires. So I think it's a valid point. Right. Are we happy to approve the officer move to the vote and vote on approving the officer recommendation? Perfect. Right, that's unanimous. So we have approved that goes out for consultation. Excellent. Right, and now we move on to agenda item 8, which is a review of the taxi policy guidance and the conditions for private hire and taxis. So again, if I can ask our licensing and public protection managers to introduce the report, please.
Thank you, Chair. So you'll be well aware that last year there was a consultation on a draft proposed taxi and private hire licensing policy. Those consultation comments didn't go any further in development due to staff changes in the licensing team. I joined the team in November and it's been my job to pick up outstanding pieces of work. So I've been working with Councillor Afston on this and we have kept most of the proposed policy changes except for the wheelchair accessible vehicle 2021 policy requirements that we have dealt with earlier this evening. But all other policy changes that were proposed last summer remain. There's also some additional changes. They're outlined in 3.2 of your report. I can go through those, but they are in the consultation document that we're asking you to complete this evening. Obviously, I can answer any questions. So we started a 6-week consultation on Monday this week, which will close on the 13th of April. I'll then collate consultation comments and assess them all. And then myself and my Cabinet member will work through those with a view to take that to Cabinet later this sort of spring, summer time for adoption. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? So I've got one about whether we're sort of risk sleepwalking ourselves into the same weird and wonderful situation we've just dealt with in the previous item with the taxi drivers in terms of 3.6.1 and 3.6.2, i.e. we're not going to renew any vehicle licence. Unless I've misread it, you could have someone that we're going to end all vehicles on the 1st of January 2030 and require a full carbon neutral fleet. And I think we might want to look at learning from drivers who've got vehicles and allow them to gracefully age off the fleet rather than having a hard cut off, because that really hasn't worked particularly well when we did it for moving to WAV, and I fear that we might end up in the same situation. So have I read that correctly?
Can I just comment on that as well? That actually environmentally to scrap a perfectly good car doesn't make sense, because the amount of carbon that goes into making a new car is actually significant as well. So I support what you're saying, basically.
Thank you, Chair. So the 1st of January 2030 date is the date that the Council have set a neutral, carbon neutral aim by, and have declared a climate emergency. Any vehicle licences, for example, if they're licensed on the 1st of November 2029, will be allowed to continue until the 31st of October 2030, but then on their renewal date on the 1st of November would have to be carbon neutral. The whole of Gloucestershire, all licensing authorities have declared a carbon emergency. I have reached out to the other Gloucestershire licensing authorities in terms of what they're doing in terms of carbon, kind of, what their plans are. At the moment, most are not developing any policies due to the devolution going on, and that we may end up with 1 or 2 licensing policies for the whole of Gloucestershire that might be different. But this is a date that was proposed last year, and I've kept that in the draft consultation document. So I think at this point, if you'd like to comment on that, and those comments will be considered once the consultation closes.
Councillor Boyes.
Are we sort of making our comments now? Is that, yeah?
I think we can move into the comments as well. Yeah.
Okay. It was just a comment stroke question. It was, my first one is the ancillary policies. Why are they not within the body of the actual policy? So like whistleblowing and data sharing. Was my first question. And the second one was around something we just touched on a few minutes ago, and it was about language proficiency. So some of, we mentioned, it's not asking us to change anything here, but it's asking us to perhaps add something. The acceptable qualifications that we've used there as a guide, like GCSE to NVQ, BTEC, they're very specific to, England. I mean, in Scotland, you wouldn't even be doing this. So when people come to the UK and they're asked to provide their language proficiency, for example, health and care workers or a student temporary worker, for example, they go through in the .gov website, they go through a secure English language test, which uses the framework that's set out in the Council of Europe and set out by all European countries that use that framework, which is the CEFR framework. And I wonder if we could just make reference to that as well, because if they're using the CEFR framework, the Common European Regulatory Framework for language proficiency, they may actually have all that already. They might not have a GCSE or a BTEC or an NVQ or whatever. If it's a common immigration standard set by the government, and it might be something they already have coming from a European country. So if we could just possibly add that in as per the government's own policy on language proficiency in certain jobs, that they might have that already, so it might be helpful but in addition to the GCSEs and the standard UK qualifications. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. First point about the ancillary policy. Sorry, Councillor Boyes. Is that with regards to the licensed vehicle emission and wheelchair accessibility policy that was adopted in 2023? Thank you. Sorry, I misunderstood that. Yes, sorry, they're not included in the document, but we do have those. We can update the document with those. With regards to language proficiency, that's a generic wording that we have as part of the Gloucestershire Common Standards with the other 5 local authorities. They are only examples of qualifications we will accept. So we're testing the basic level of English understanding to have a conversation, understand a conversation that's taking place in the licensed vehicle so that it could spot any safeguarding concerns, for example, also be able to understand road signs and road directions. If somebody doesn't have one of those qualifications, we do have a setup in Gloucestershire where they can undertake the Versant language proficiency test, and that's something they would do sat with an officer, and that's where they listen to English and repeat English. If they were to fail that, we would also then refer it to an officer to have an open conversation with them to see if there's any concerns. If there were still concerns, then we would refer the application to a licensing committee for consideration.
So I've got Councillor Pinniger and then Councillor Sankey.
Different subject. You refer to Euro 6 or better throughout all of these documents, but you don't specify what better is. So we know electric, but there's also zero emission capable, which refers to hybrids. I'd quite like to see that in there. I think it's important that we specify what's better than Euro 6, because diesel is not a preferred option at this point with the particulates. You can ask the air quality team for comment, and they'll be able to help you with that.
Thank you, Chair. If you could put that in your consultation comment. We have consulted with the air quality team and the environmental protection team. With carbon neutral, it doesn't just mean electric vehicles, it could be hydrogen vehicles and ultra low emissions vehicles as well.
Do you want to come back on that, or are you?
Yeah, it's not. I mean, carbon emissions are important, but this is zero emissions capable. So when a taxi is a hybrid, within the town they can be driving on electric, and then if they have an airport run, they can use the motor. So it's a bit different from carbon emissions. It's about health more than climate change.
Councillor Sankey.
Thank you. Just going back to the language thing, I just want to support what Councillor Boyes has said, because I know in licensing before we've had taxi drivers who've come who haven't understood things in writing, because I think, as Chair said, understanding the language is one thing, but actually understanding something written is quite different. So I would support what Councillor Boyes has said.
Thank you, Chair. We wouldn't test them on a policy. They need to obviously understand the policy and their requirements. But yes, I take what you said earlier about having a translation of a document. We want that basic level of understanding, and that's what the English test would test, is that they understand a conversation and any safeguarding concerns in the vehicle so that we can protect the public. It wouldn't be to a depth that you can understand a book in English.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. That blue banner over there is of the Council of Europe, and Councillor Boyce is a member of the Council of Europe, and I fully support her suggestion that we incorporate the CEFR for the languages in this. It's about inclusion, it's about diversity. We welcome people from Europe, we welcome refugees in Cheltenham, but what is critical in terms of policy, I'm not expecting, I agree with the officer, not expecting people whose native language is not English to understand the ins and outs of policy, but they've got to understand certain factors like the safeguarding other issues. So I fully support, and thank you for Councillor Sankey for being the first to mention it. I sitting there looking at the Council of Europe flag and thinking, she's on the Council of Europe, and she's made the suggestion. I think we should take it seriously and think about getting that adopted, please, if we might. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. As I said, it's only a list of example documents. It's the same wording that we have in all 6 local authorities, but I'm happy to take that back to our Gloucestershire County group and update that document. Obviously, when you update a policy, it has to go through the licensing committee process, so that would mean that for all 6 councils, but happy to take that comment.
Yeah, thank you. And I would just add that Cheltenham has been an exemplar in terms of policy for taxis and so on in this county. And I was corrected 2 committees ago about saying that there was the Cheltenham model. And I was told it wasn't the Cheltenham model. that was my language. We are a leader in terms of the policy and how this goes forward. And I'm mindful of what the other authorities do. But if they can't keep pace with Cheltenham, that's their lookout. I think we should do our own course and let them catch up, particularly as we're no longer in the EU and we are still members of the European Council. So that's my view.
Councillor Henniger.
Sorry, just to come back on that then. So are we saying that the people who are sat here tonight couldn't read this? Some of them.
I don't.
But surely it should be written in a way that the taxi drivers can read it, and they are not degree qualified necessarily. Their level of English is lower. So this whole policy then and the bylaws, what should we do?
Well, we can't change the bylaws because that's down to lobbying the Secretary of State. So I think that might be one for someone to write to our MP and see if there's a question in there about making sure these are in plain and simple English. In terms of the Gloucestershire wide policy, I think that's something that the Gloucestershire Licensing Officers Group could look into, but we may be overtaken by events, as in local government reorganisation, for want of a better description. Trundling through the comments that we've actually got, so starting at page 50 of the report. So do we agree with, you might want to just get ready to capture some comments on this, and somewhere between you, and then we can. So, do we agree that we should display information on how to make a complaint? I think we should have information on how to make a complaint, but we should also have information on how to make a compliment, because the only drivers we ever see before committee are ones that people have complained about, and I really want this council to recognise drivers that go above and beyond in some way, because I am sure there are people who the public would really like to compliment the drivers that we as a committee never see, because they are following the policies. In terms of the medical...
Just to say, can we make sure that that is also in plain English? We have international tourists visiting Cheltenham.
Do we agree with the frequency for medical? I think we're probably inclined to agree with. Well, let's go through this and say we're probably inclined to agree with most of the policies because this is the council, and we're agreeing with our own policy. However, we've got the comments for question 4 about zero emissions and WAVs. The staying as a WAV, temporary vehicles. In terms of taximeter tests, I think we need to look at that one, which is question 7, in conjunction with the moving to the calendar-based testing, which is somewhere else in the document. Having tests that are no more than a month old makes sense. That's what the MOT is, so I think that's perfectly reasonable. The proposed roof dimensions, shrinking the roof dimensions makes the vehicles more efficient aerodynamically, so that's good for the environment. Calendar controlled meters makes them less liable to tampering. Do we agree with safeguarding training for private hire operators? I think safeguarding is important, and anyone that's in this should be involved, should be able to have an understanding. In terms of question about card machines, yes, because this is one of the biggest bugbears I think people contact us about. I'd really like the council to explore whether we can be a card provider so that we can amortise the costs across the trade, but I'm not sure we're allowed to do that under procurement rules. I also think we should make it clear that we're going to require only Visa and MasterCard because of the very high merchant fees with Amex. And I don't think it's fair on the trade to force them to pay excessive merchant fees for Amex in that sense. But we may want, I think that's something that officers may want to look into just to check that that still is the case. Medical exemption processes, I suspect we agree with. Richard?
Going back to card payments, the price structure, the charging for fares, is that set in our annual council budget? Where is that set, and why isn't it in the policy?
The fare card is set by cabinet member, the cabinet member decision. So the fare card's just been revised. So the fare card sets the rates. So there are 4 rates. I think one is rate 1 is daytime, rate 2 is nighttime, rate 3 is Christmas and New Year, and rate 4 is race week. And there's also fees for extra passengers, extra luggage, and there's a soiling fee if you throw up in the taxi, which I think we've recently increased quite considerably, which hopefully, say again? Yes. Well, if someone throws up in the taxi is out of service and they have to go and clean it. So I think, is it £75?
75 now.
Yeah. So if anyone's watching, don't throw up in a taxi during race week because it will cost you £75. I'm not sure that that's actually enough, and I personally put it up more, but it's not my decision. So card, medical exemption, tests for topographical questions for the knowledge test, the notification for private hire. I think, are we happy with that? I'm not seeing any. Councillor Harvey.
Chair, thank you. I'm just going back to the topographical one that you just. I've been asked locally by a taxi driver if I had the postcode of the place where I wanted him to take me, and so I'm pleased that we've got that in there, because if you go to a restaurant or you don't know the postcode of the restaurant or the pub you're going to, you expect the driver to know where it is, and not to anyway.
And this is for private hire drivers, not taxis. So this is pre-booked, rather than. Well, if they know where they're going from and to, they can look it up in advance. That's, I think, the point on that one. So there's some information about CCTV. I think the thing that we need to make sure there, and I don't know whether it's captured, is that they're required to keep the CCTV for a reasonable amount of time and not provide it to the authority. That's probably already in our conditions, isn't it? But it's the frustration of drivers not having CCTV when there's an alleged incident, and I think we need to make sure that's picked up.
Yes, thanks, Chair. So yeah, the CCTV wording's been updated to make sure that if anyone's got it in their vehicle, it complies with the ICO requirements for its data protection. Also, there's now going to be a requirement, if this is adopted, that they notify the local authorities so we're aware that it's in the vehicle, so we can have a record of that. At the moment, we don't mandate CCTV, so that was something that the county officers group was looking at, but it is a significant piece of work and will cause a significant amount of work for officers as well. So at the moment, that hasn't developed any further.
And my final comment, I think we do need to make sure we don't sleepwalk into the perfectly good vehicles having to be scrapped on January 2030, based on our previous experience. I know if we've got common standards or shared standards, that probably needs a little bit more work, but hopefully the learning that we had tonight and in a few previous committees can be taken into account on that one. Councillor Pinniger.
Yes, sorry. I think I didn't get my point across very clearly. The policy, this policy document, the one thing that a lot of people will care about is how and why the fares are set at the level they're set at. And that's not in the policy and it's not in the survey. So it might be good to take that to the county group and say, why aren't we telling people where the fares come from? Because we just expected to accept those.
Thank you, Chair. There is a legislative process that we have to go through for setting fares, and that's unique to Cheltenham Borough Council. We have to go through a consultation with the trade, with a proposal. So what we did on the last fare review is we worked out the rate of inflation and factored all of that into the formula. We then went out to consultation and asked the trade what they thought. Prior to the calculations, we did have a meeting with the trade because they wanted a review of their fares because one hadn't been carried out for nearly 2 years. And they wanted, at the time, rate 4 was only for March Festival. One of the proposals was they wanted rate 4 for November meeting as well. They also wanted the soil and charge increase. So we came up with a proposal. There was then a 28-day consultation and we considered the responses. And that's all done through the Cabinet member.
Thank you for explaining it to me. What I'm suggesting is there should be a line or at least a paragraph, even a simplified explanation of how that's done, because that would be a very, that question will be on a lot of people's mind when they look at a policy or a survey about taxis. How much does it cost and why?
So, are there any more? Well, you all obviously have the option to submit responses personally. Licensing committee is the lead consultee. So, are there any? Before I move on, are there any more comments, Councillor Stonehart?
Thank you, Chair. Did you actually get to question 20, which was the returns changing from quarterly to monthly, and what was the rationale behind that?
I think for the ones that we didn't explicitly mention, it was going to be generally agree because the council's thought about these things, but I'll let officers explain the rationale.
Thank you, Chair. So currently the monthly operator returns have to be done quarterly. The reason for monthly is so that we have more up-to-date information so we can keep track of where vehicles and drivers are working.
So, any more for any more? Perfect. Right. Are you happy with what the responses you've got on that? Excellent. Right. So we now move on to agenda item 9, which is review of sexual entertainment venue licensing policy. So again, if I can ask you to introduce that report, please.
Thank you, Chair. So the current sexual entertainment venue policy is currently out to consultation. Again, there is a list of questions attached at Appendix 1 of your report for you to work through. The proposals are outlined in the report. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you, Chair.
I'm happy to move this as a mixed. Any questions for the officer and any comments? Anyone want to begin? Councillor Boyes.
It's just a comment. I'm really happy with the policy, and I'd want to thank all the officers who were involved with the work. To everybody who took part in the consultation, I was part of it with David, we actually spoke with objectors, which I found was a very, very useful exercise, together with Louis Krug. And I also want to thank the Cabinet member for her input as well, because I think everybody has pulled together and produced a really good document. And I've been on the SEB meetings for about six and a half years, and I think this is a great document. And I would, if anybody in the public is listening, I really would urge them to engage with the consultation, because it's really important that our policy remains relevant, is robust and is up to date to promote the highest possible standards, which I think it does. So thank you to everyone involved with it, and I really do support it.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to add to that it was Louis Krog who did all of the policy work on this, so I can't take any credit and neither can the team. Thank you.
From my perspective on going through the comments, so I definitely agree that we should continue to have a preference for licensing and regulation as opposed to unlicensed under the frequent use exemption. I think that gives us the best opportunity of safeguarding everybody, whether they're involved in it, whatever role they are involved in it and those that have no interest and are not, just passers by. In terms of the nil limit, I think having the nil limit outside of the town centre gives us at least a good steer for those that wish to provide relevant entertainment as to where it's likely to be tolerable. I know there's a wide range of views from not just public but across councillors on this. In terms of the setting the limit at 2, my preference would be to leave it to the market to decide and just say, because why are we saying it should be this area is generally acceptable and this area generally isn't? And I think someone could come back and say, well, why are you saying 2? Why not 1 or 3? And I think if we leave it to the market to decide, then that may be a better option, because ultimately it may be that going forward, as attitudes change, the requirement drops to 1 premises. It may be things change and it goes up to 3 that can be supported during race events. But choosing a particular number seems possibly a fool's errand, and just leaving it to the market may be better, because you could have one operator's put in 2 licenses, someone else wishes to come into the market, equally well run, equally well managed, but we've set ourselves, there's only 2, so you end up with a rather less helpful situation. So that would be my suggestion. I know others may have a different view. In terms of amending I'm not sure how many questions there are. How many know I? Okay, if I take Simon now.
Yeah, I was just going to agree with you that perhaps, because if we stick to 2, there is always that danger that the third person is going to go for an unlicensed, which takes us back to square one again.
Thank you. So in terms of the extension to the designated permitted area, I think incorporating under the PROM, which we've previously decided to license, just makes sense. Trying to work out where this is, what areas are acceptable from a legal perspective is quite a difficult challenge. And obviously we've varied the condition to say that somewhere just outside is okay. As a council, we've done this on several occasions, and I think keeping this under review is important. In terms of amending the conditions, I think it makes sense to change them. So, for example, replacing words like state of undress with display of nudity is clear, because one of them is a term that's in the legislation and the other isn't. So it's things like that really work rather well, and it makes it more clear. Taking out things that mean if a performer happens to touch someone accidentally, brush past someone, so that isn't a technical breach, again makes sense. In terms of amended condition 24, setting out the requirements for what's provided for performers is actually another positive step. If you look at what the condition 24 previously said and look at what it's been amended to, I think it's shown that we've tried to really help the people who are working there. Councillor Joy.
I did actually want to really acknowledge the changes that have been made in condition 24. I was actually really pleased to see the specificity of it, because that was part of the feedback that we did receive from some of the participants of the consultation, and it really, I think it took us aback, quite honestly, to see some of the conditions that they have to endure when they're working pretty intensive, very, 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 very busy, fraught jobs. So I'm really, really pleased to see that we're actually ensuring that working conditions are enshrined in the legislation, and I just wanted to say how much of a difference I really think that makes. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think people have very different, some people that haven't really looked at the legislation around this in detail, probably have very views that are not really focused on who we have to protect. You know, the policy is there to protect the performers, and it does, and this does that. It's there to protect the customers. If you look at what happened in London in the 80s, people would be, and other places around the world probably currently, people will go into a premises and suddenly find that they've been billed £50 for a half pint of Coke, as in the Coca-Cola. I'll make that clarification. Half a pint of Coca-Cola or lemonade because of the rip-off conditions, and we have conditions there to protect, or we have conditions on our licence to protect customers as well. In terms of providing plans, I think that's important. We would require that for planning, and I think it makes sense to have the ability for members and the public to see the layout when they're commenting on an application. Having a designated person in charge seems to make a great deal of sense. We need to list what the policies are in terms of the discretionary grounds. We've done a lot of work on the equality impact assessment. One of the issues that a lot of the objectors raise is the public sector equality duty, and I think trying to look at how this policy affects people with protected characteristics is really, really important, especially following a number of judicial reviews and the case law that's come from those. And I think we need to thank Leo Charalambides, who is the editor of the Journal of Licensing, because he's made quite a contribution to this. In terms of things that I would like us to think about that I'm not sure we've added to the policy, I'd like us to think about how the pledge that the council would tackle violence against women and girls could be added to the policy within the legal framework that it operates in. And the other thing that I think would be a beneficial condition is to try and require those people working for the applicant in the public realm, which may well be the people distributing information about the applicant's courtesy vehicle, to have bystander training done on a basis, and I would say once every 3 years or two or 3 years, so that it isn't an onerous burden on those individuals, but we can then say that actually these people working for an applicant who are in town have got bystander training. So if they see something happening during race week, they know how they're better trained. So if we set it to 3 years, if you've got someone who starts working for an applicant in their first year of university, they would only need to do that training once for their 3-year degree course. So I think that it's trying to find a proportionality in that, and it would be another step that we as a council could take to say, actually, let's look at bystander training, because then there are all these people out there who will have done some training, and we could just make a little bit of a positive difference without being too onerous on the applicant. So I've got Councillor Joy.
Thank you, Chair. Just aside from this policy, we are due to review the Licensing Act Statement of Licensing Policy this year, and VOG, Ask Angela, Spiken, etc. will be included in that review. So that will obviously run alongside with the evening nighttime economy.
Councillor Joy.
Thank you so much. I did also want to say that I welcome that integrated approach to kind of safety, particularly since I'm quite aware that many people working at SEVs, in that particular industry, they experience unique vulnerabilities, which often do come alongside specific profiles. So it tends to be the queer community can be disproportionately overrepresented in these industries. People who are not necessarily they don't necessarily have a high standard of social mobility or education available to them, and sometimes it can be like a really useful source of work. It just needs to make sure that it is being. I really appreciate the fact that we are seeking to regulate this to a higher extent, because I kind of feel like it is within wherever it's within our purview to try to link together different works that we're doing and just ensure that we are as inclusive as possible. I understand that this can be a stigmatized profession, but that's exactly why it can lead to vulnerabilities. And I would be really interested in sort of seeing how this sort of policy integrates more with safeguarding and more with our social standards. I kind of I would look forward to sort of seeing any kind of further work on this, really. Thank you.
Councillor Pinniger.
It's a suggestion. Rather than asking whether or not we should have a limit of 2 and that not making sense, or just not have a limit, we can protect ourselves slightly by having a rate of change. So you could put in that we will add a maximum of 2 in each financial year. And we know how many were licensed, so we can say, well, there are 2 more now, so 4. But we don't get 1 year when something happens in the law, or I don't know, that, society changes, we get 10, 20. We can protect ourselves a little by having a rate of change.
Officers may have a view on that. I think trying to put that into the policy may be a little bit challenging in terms of how we legally nuance that. I think the backstop for the rate of change and what have you, all of those issues are, if we say that this area is acceptable, the likelihood is that, as we've seen, applications will receive objections from members of the public, and any application that receives an objection has to be determined by a licensing committee. So if you suddenly had the 2, let's say we have the 2 and they've applied and they're dealt with under the presumption in favour of existing premises, and then you get another however many come along, they're likely to come before licensing committee, and the committee is that check and balance, because the courts in their case law have said, provided you are applying the law in a way that's rational, reasonable and proportionate, as a council, when it comes to regulating SEV, as long as you aren't sort of having a particularly egregious disregard for the law and for human rights and for all of the statute that we have to comply with, you've got a very wide range of flexibility to approve things or to refuse things. And I think the courts have said, if an area has changed and an applicant's come back the next year, it's perfectly reasonable for the council to say, yeah, we licensed it last year, the area has changed a bit, we're not licensing it this year. and those decisions have been judicially reviewed, and the courts have said, yeah, it's within the council's rights to do that. So I think that's probably a better backstop. If there was a large number of applications, most of them will come to most, if not all of them, will come to licensing and be dealt with. Well, someone would look at it and go, we're turning the council, we're turning the centre of Cheltenham literally into Sin City. Some people may say we already have. I wouldn't agree with them, but there would be that provision under grounds D to say, yeah, you're changing the nature of the area and it's legitimate to refuse. And I think that leaves the decisions to the committee, and then you can take each application on its own individual merits, and people who are elected to the committee will make those decisions. That's a personal view. If officers can think about whether it's possible to put a rate of change in the policy, I'm happy for it to be considered by the cabinet member. Ultimately, the next steps, the cabinet member considers the policy, it goes to cabinet, and then it will undoubtedly come to full council for us to review.
Of course, if 1 year there is 0, then the next year there could never be any again, could there? Because the rate of change would be infinite. So be slightly careful.
Councillor Harvey.
Chair, thank you. I mean, this whole policy is such an emotive topic, politicised in the past for things that we can't control as a council. And I just think this committee has been really, really good in listening to all viewpoints brought to it with an open mind on the basis of the law, that is the law of the land, which we can't change. It's primary legislation, that's for the government to change. And this new government has indicated they don't wish to change it either. So, but I think, and I'm not just idly blowing smoke in your direction, Chair. I think the way you chair this emotive topic and your background knowledge of and how much you've put into this to make it fair for everybody is an exemplar really of how to chair such a sensitive issue. Those of us that have been on the committee for a while know that members have been threatened, members have been abused, and I think a number of the committee had said today that if people read the policy and read what we do, then come and shout at us if we're getting it wrong, or at least comment on, on the policy and which is going out to consultation. But please don't shout at us with no basis for it. So I'd just like to thank you. I know this is your last meeting as chair, but thank you, David, for being that exemplar, but also a font of knowledge, frankly. I know you're not a lawyer. You never want to be. Sorry, Vicky. But no, it is such an emotive topic. And I think what's happened in the past, and I don't want to go over the past, but some of the things that have been said to our committee members have been beyond the pale and so unfair. And I've got 3 strong women in my life. I've got a wife and 2 strong daughters. And for us to be suggested that we don't care about women's safety in this town, I can't use the defence I would want to, because I know this is going to the YouTube. But it offends me that people think that we don't care about women and girls in this town, because we blimmin' well do. And I think we demonstrate that with how we deal with this particular issue. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. I mean, from the point of view of trying to list the things that we have done, we've written to the previous government, we've written to the current government, we've tried engaging with the Institute of Licensing, we have tried engaging with the local government association, and I can understand why politicians and organisations feel that this is a political hot potato. People do not necessarily wish to discuss the matter. I think reading the Journal of Licensing and the articles that have been written by some very learned practitioners, whether that's council officers or barristers, is actually quite eye-opening. And I think there is a need for people to be able to have a polite discourse and disagree. I know we've recently had, a number of us have recently had correspondence that has crossed a line of being inappropriate. And again, we have to just, in the first instance, ask members of the public to deal with a contentious subject in a respectful way. And of course, as councillors, there are people who've been threatened, we have the option of cutting off communication with people, and if things are particularly egregious, the council can take action, including referring such matters to the police. I hope that will not be necessary. I would encourage anyone that is watching who has concerns about this to read the policy and respond to the review. The whole point of doing this consultation is so that this council shows that it has sought to engage with everybody, whether they are involved, whether they work in this, whether they are a promoter, an applicant, whether they are a performer, whether they work in the nighttime economy, whether they are visitors to Race Week, whether they are someone who really doesn't like this, whether they have moral objections, religious objections, which the law doesn't allow us to take into account, but we still need to listen to those people, whether they have objections based on violence against women and girls. We also need to think about niche communities. This policy does not just apply to female performers for a male audience. The law makes no specification of the sex of the performer or the sexual preference of the audience. So it is a much more complicated and nuanced matter than people make out. So there we go. I won't say rant over, it's not quite a rant, but it's really, really important that people comment on this. And as I said, I know from speaking to you, some of you individually, people have different views on this. And I would encourage you to respond. You'll get an opportunity to vote on it at council when it comes back after it's been through the cabinet process. So, you'll all get another say. Right, are there any, before I move on, are there any more? No, I'm not seeing anything. Right, so we have, very briefly, a review of decisions, which hopefully officers will just be able to give us a couple of updates, which will be the appeal, the appeals that have been dealt with and what have you. I know some of them aren't concluded, but it's probably worth just covering that off.
Thank you, Chair. We have 2 driver appeals, and we had an initial hearing on Monday. One of those was withdrawn. The other has been set for a hearing in July, so we'll put the case file together for that one, and that was based on a revocation in December. The other appeal we have is for Koloshi Restaurant, which was revoked year before that. That's also been appealed, and we're just waiting further instructions on that one. But we believe there may be a change of ownership, so I'll be able to update committee at the next meeting. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. So we now move on to agenda item 11, which is any other item the chairman determined, chair, I should say chair really, any other item the chair determines is urgent and which requires a decision. And we have a street trading application, which I will ask the officers to just explain. Hopefully you're all aware of this from papers that were emailed around last night. But if you haven't had a chance to read them, then obviously you are probably advised to abstain on the vote.
Thank you, Chair. So this is an application for a street trading consent for Mr Cambray's Curiosity in Cambray Place. The consultation ended last week, hence why we're determining the application this evening as urgent business. There wasn't enough time to schedule a licensing committee to determine the application. We have received some objections. There's 3 outstanding, and you've had copies of those objections. The main concerns are noise, and also there is a psychotherapy centre close by, and it feels it may cause distress to some of the clients with alcohol being on the doorstep. The street trading consent is for 8 a.m. till 5 a.m. over the duration of March Festival. And it's a marquee erected outside of the premises. There are several outcomes for today. You can grant the application as applied for. You could choose to grant the application with amendments and or additional conditions that you might feel may mediate some of the concerns. You could refuse the application. If you refuse the application, that are the 3 outcomes. So I'm just reading the email that was sent to Councillor Wingham to see if he would determine it without coming to a committee meeting. So they're the 3 options. I would just like to point out that Environmental Health were consulted. They didn't make any comments with regards to any nuisance. Also, we have had another application for a marquee in the same street for Taylor's Eaton House. That received no objections. That's been granted. So I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Councillor Boyes.
Sorry. My question is, could you clarify possibly, I don't know if you can or not, what the actual opening hours of the external bar will be? Because within the email, it's stating 1800 hours. But if I look at the consultation letter, so the email correspondence went back and forth, but in the consultation letter, it says 0800 hours. So is it 18 or is it 8? That's really just my question I've got.
Thank you, Chair. The the hours that have been applied for are 0800 hours, so 8 a.m. until 0500 hours, so 5 a.m. So that's to offer breakfast in the morning and then also to tie in with the venue's business and the sexual entertainment venue that will be operating.
Councillor Dr. Steinhardt.
Could you just clarify whether that makes a difference to the sale of alcohol during the time limit? And I see that the bar won't open until 1800. Is there any sort of control over that? That it definitely won't.
Thank you, Chair. The opening hours, so for the street trading, they have applied from 8 in the morning, so that's to permit the sale of hot food and hot drinks, which you need the street trading consent for. There is a temporary event notice that has been submitted and granted, so the sale of alcohol in that area will commence at 6 p.m.
Do you need to come back?
Yeah, please, and just continues until when? Have you got an end time?
That would be 6 p.m. until 5 a.m.
Councillor Pinniger.
I just wanted to clarify whether at the moment, if someone wants a cigarette or to vape, they will come out of the bar and they'll sit at those tables. If it's raining, they'll stand up and they'll probably yell at each other because they'll have a beer inside them. In the future, there'll be a marquee there. Are they able to smoke and vape inside that marquee, or do they go even further out into the street to smoke and vape? I don't know what the rules are around smoking and vaping in an enclosed space, but I think they're not supposed to.
So smoking and vaping, they'd have to comply with the Public Health Act. So for smoking, they'd have to go outside of the marquee to do that.
But if you look at the plans, there's an exterior area to the rear of the premises as well. So that may well be providing a smoking I think that's providing a location for people to smoke. But we need to check that.
Thank you, Chair. I would need to check that with the operator. Obviously, you can condition this consent if you choose to grant it. also it may be worth noting the hours of operation at the businesses that have objected to maybe operating as well, as they probably won't be operating until the, into the early evening, late time of night.
Councillor Barrell.
Yes, I'm just wondering about food and drink. Could you condition that has to occur within the marquee, or will that spread out as well as the smoking and vaping?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, you can condition the consent to control access and egress to that marquee.
I think the question we might want to ask is whether that's a practical or practicable condition for the applicant to enforce, given how busy Race Week is. For those of you that've gone round with licensing, some things may seem good on paper, but they're not going to be very effectively enforceable or in the situation of Race Week. And I think it's things like how you deal with. Clearly, you do not want people leaving with glasses, and you need to manage that. But it may be a bit less practical to stop people leaving with takeaway food, and it might not be reasonable or proportionate to put that condition on. You definitely don't want people walking around with glasses if you can avoid it. So my question on this one would be, how do we... Obviously, it's in front of an SEV, a licensed SEV. Is there anything we need to think about condition-wise in how the two applications interact with each other, of things that we need to deal with? I mean, I think, for example, the SEV will have a condition about scantily clad performers shouldn't be visible from outside the venue, so they probably shouldn't be going into that area anyway. But it may be things like that we just need to condition for the avoidance of any doubt, because I have a feeling that if it was left to interpretation, it might well upset some of the neighbours if that was to happen. And it might just be worth thinking of anything we need to move across from that licence, those existing conditions, just to make it clear. Don't do that here.
Thank you, Chair. So the sexual entertainment venue has a plan which is completely inside of Mr Cambray's curiosity, so that should not come into that marquee. If you look at the photograph of the marquee that's going to be used, it has got windows all around it. So again, those performers shouldn't come into that area because it will be very obvious from the outside. We have got Cheltenham Borough Council licensing team working all over races next week, and we'll be inspecting the sexual entertainment venues to ensure that they're complying with their conditions. So we will be out and about. I did speak to the operator of the premises at our Night Safe meeting yesterday. There will be door staff in the marquee and also on the SEB entrance as well. So they will be in situ over the event.
Councillor Pinniger.
I'm still concerned about the effect on the counselling service next door. Sorry, that's the question actually. Is it immediately adjacent? Are there already barriers to prevent people spreading across the frontage of this therapy place? There's not a lot we can help them with. If there's a tent, if there's a marquee, then it's not very different from there just being a beer garden. So it's not like we can help them greatly here in licensing, but I just need a few more details about where they are and what the effect might be, and the cost to them, because obviously they won't be able to operate by the sound of things.
Thank you, Chair. We've just checked Google Maps and it is next door to the premises. I don't know, sorry, I didn't cover it in my opening comments. There is a pavement licence in place for this premises, 365 days a year. So if the marquee wasn't in operation, people could still sit outside and consume drink.
Thank you. I mean, if I move on to us actually sort of moving to the debate, I think I'm happy for this to be granted as applied for, on the grounds that is it so there were two applications. This one's had objections, something almost identical opposite hasn't. So my first question really that I'm asking myself is the objection is the objection based on material grounds, or is it more about who the applicant is, which isn't a licensing consideration? Also, if I look at it through Race Week, and who will be where and when, there will obviously be some activity around breakfast time, which is why they've asked for the morning licence. There won't be any SEV at that point because it's not licensed to start until 6 p.m. And during the rest of the day, it's likely to be relatively quiet on the grounds that most of the people will be at the racecourse. So you're looking at it starting to be in use at 6 p.m. And once it's in use, the rest of the town will be full of people who've come down from the racecourse and will have consumed quite a bit of alcohol at the racecourse. They may well have stopped on the way back from the racecourse to the town centre, and it would be nigh on impossible to work out which of the many licensed venues they've gone into before this one, and really who is causing what noise. And once you get through until the very late hours, there probably won't be the use by the counselling service that will be interfered with. And I think we're back to the, is the problem this, or is this the problem, or is Race Week in general the problem? And if we come to the conclusion it's Race Week in general, it would be unreasonable to say no to this one when another one's been approved because there were no objections. And I think in terms of the noise, our experts, as in environmental health, have raised no objection. And if we were to refuse this on the grounds of that, it might be seen as an unreasonable decision because there's a lack of... the evidence hasn't been supported by our own experts, which puts us in quite a shaky situation. So that, my view is to grant the application as applied for because I can't really see any other conditions we need. I think the SEV conditions on the SEV protect that anyway. So I suspect granting it, I'm happy granting it with the conditions as applied for. That would have been my decision had I not brought it to committee, but I think the public have a right to see these things determined by committee if at all possible. So that's my view. I've got Councillor Boyes, Councillor Dr Pemberton and then Councillor Pinniger.
I just want to say I entirely agree, Chair, and I would be very happy to support this as well.
Fundamentally, that's where I'm coming from. But I think if anything, I want to say that maybe there's a positive in having a marquee there because it will corral people and encourage them to stay within that environment rather than being outside it. Whereas if it's just tables on the front, people will walk around them and stand beside them, and they might stand 3 metres away, they might stand 4 metres away. And frankly, the whole thing with food, people buy food and take it away. They walk up the street smoking. I can't stop this premises from supplying those things. And at least one of the objections did mention the SEV, and I do suspect, like you say, that maybe that's a motivation.
Councillor Pinniger.
I agree with what you said. I just wanted to point out that it's almost comical at the Midland, when they used to be called the Midland, now the marquee at the front, people would get the train to Cheltenham, pile out, go in the Midland, watch the races on TV and drink all day. So the idea that it's quiet during the day is possibly a bit dubious. But other than that, your summation was pretty much what I've been thinking.
In that case, let's not prolong this anymore and move to the vote on the grant the application as applied for. Right, that's unanimous. Excellent. So, agenda item 12 are the dates of the next meeting. So we have a subcommittee for alcohol and gambling on the 19th of March, which may or may not be moved. We have another provisional alcohol and gambling subcommittee on the 25th of March, and we have the miscellaneous subcommittee on the 2nd of April if there are any items to come forward for that. I think the next full meeting of this committee may need to sign off some exempt minutes. It's probably worth just checking because I think one of the miscellaneous ones may well have some exempt minutes to do with taxi drivers. And there's obviously no exempt items on here for us to sign off. I don't get the joy of reading the exempt session statement on my final meeting. So this is going to be the final meeting before I stop being chair because I'm becoming mayor of Cheltenham. So I don't know how long I've been doing this, but it's quite a while. I really wanted to say thank you to all of the councillors, both those here, those past and present, for making this a reasonably easy job most of the time. It really has been good to work with you all. I'd also like to thank the officer team, again, past and present, for their support. I think having worked with Louis, who has now moved on to be our council's Deplo, Louis was very active in the Institute of Licensing and a good person to learn from. We also have a really good officer team. And there's one person who's not here, one of the Democratic Services officers, Claire, who has been really, really supportive for a long time and helped me. So I just really wanted to say thank you very much to everybody, and finish with the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So long, and thanks for all the fish. And with that, 8:10, I'll call the meeting closed. Thank you very much.